Hi and welcome to the vlog where I'll show you the process of knitting my first colorwork sweater. I chose a simple colorwork design in order not to be too overwhelmed. So I'm knitting the Norma Sweater by my favorite things Knitwear. I decided to knit it using the recommended yarn but with a different color combination. So I used Isager's Tweed in raw white, held with Isager silk mohair in 6 for the color A, or the main color. And then I used Isager's Tweed in chocolate and silk mohair in 60 for color C, and Tvinni in 33S for color B, so the red. It's a pattern that was released early this year as part of the Isager Archives collection, and I just fell in love with it. It is a top-down raglan that is quite deep with colorwork stripes. I made my swatch on the 16th of March, and it definitely took me a moment to work with 2 strands on the same row. However, the pattern includes some clear instructions on how to do colorwork knitting and on how to hold strands in order to have one color be dominant over the other, and that was very helpful. I didn't even look at tutorials on YouTube for that, which I usually would do in order to make sure I was understanding the pattern correctly. The next day it was time to cast on. It was my first time doing a tubular cast on, which was so satisfying to do. I love a tubular bind off. It's one of my preferred way to bind off, even though it takes a bit longer, but I think I'll definitely use a tubular cast on in the future if I have to start the cast on with a ribbing. I followed the instructions for the color, which I should have made a bit shorter actually. I didn't think about it at the time, but the collar reaches quite high against my chin and I don't love that, so I actually tend to fold it down a bit when I wear the sweater, but I'll talk more about that later. When it came time to stop the 1x1 ribbing and start the raglan increases, I turned my work and did a double stitch in order to avoid a hole, so kind of like what you do when you do a German short row turn. That way my ribbing looked neater on the outside of my work rather than on the inside. Knitting the yoke was when I encountered my first issue. There were no issues with the raglan increases at all, however the pattern didn't mention how to avoid jogs in the stripes when it came to the beginning of the round. I knew that a design by Petite Knit, the Lyon sweater, was a sweater with stripes, so I looked on her website at the video tutorials linked to this design, and I found one by Kimi Mukhom, which I've linked down below, on how to make jogless stripes on a raglan sweater. I attempted to follow the tutorials, but because of how focused I was with the colorwork, and also because the beginning of round in the Norma sweater is never an increase, I wasn't clear on how and or when to use the technique, and I sometimes actually forgot to follow the instructions. So I ended up using the technique only for a couple of rounds, and then I decided to simply follow the pattern's instructions. It means that it's not the neatest results. When you look at the beginning of round on the stripes, you can see that they're a bit jogged, I guess, but it's not terrible either. The next issue came up when I realized I had 2 more stitches than supposed to on the front part of the yoke and on one of the sleeves, so 4 stitches total. That's one of the good things about knitting colorwork, is that you can actually realize your mistakes if you don't have the right number of stitches, for example, to complete a colorwork round. I decided to decrease, so I made a right leaning decrease with the red yarn and then carried on with the pattern. I'm guessing that's the reason why when it came to splitting the sleeves, I ended up having 2 or 3 stitches less than the pattern said I was supposed to be at for the sleeves. I decided to leave it as is since the design is quite oversized and I didn't think the difference would make too big of a change. I thought that would be a good time to try it on for the first time, and although my cable was a bit too small to see properly, I loved the look on me. I wasn't sure how I felt about the color, but I liked having the option of wearing it high like the mock neck it is supposed to be for colder days. The only thing that makes this not as mindless as a simple stockinette is also the slipped stitches at the beginning of round and middle of round that you're supposed to do every couple of rounds in order to create a nice detail on the body. At that point, it became a pretty mindless knit. I did have to choose moments where I could knit for a few hours to knit the colorwork stripes, mostly because I had at one point 5 balls attached to my knitting, so it meant that I could just knit for hours on end on the couch without having to move, and then I could put the project back in a project bag with only 2 skeins attached. For the hem of the body, I did my preferred bind off, which is a tubular bind off, just because it gives such a clean edge. And then it was time for the try on with the body done. And it definitely felt a bit shorter than I would have liked. I followed the pattern for the length, but I think I would have liked a couple of inches or centimeters more. But the annoying thing is that if you want to add length, that would have meant adding at least one stripe, and I didn't really want a stripe just above the ribbing. So otherwise it would have just meant adding a bit more of the stockinette just between the stripe and the ribbing, but I wasn't sure that I wanted a section that was bigger at the bottom of the body rather than the same amount of stockinette in between each stripe. So the only thing that would have been left for me to do would have been to add more centimeters to the ribbing than is suggested in the pattern, but I wasn't really keen on undoing my bind off and doing that, so I just left it as is. And then it was time for the sleeves. Each sleeve took me about 3 to 4 days, amidst daily tasks and work of knitting, and by that point I really wanted to have this project done in time for my holidays, so I powered through and ended up finishing on the eve of my departure. It meant that I couldn't wet block it before leaving, so I just did a steam block, which didn't really help the bunched up stripes, but it meant that I could use it for a whole week in Brittany before doing the wet block when I came back home. It was the perfect sweater to wear outside when it was breezy and not too warm, so I'm glad I got a few wears out of it before spring truly came around. Wet blocking was really satisfying. Although it always takes a bit of work since I have to avoid the cat, in this case the 2 cats, because I'm cat sitting my sisters, as they love to sniff and mostly eat my woolly jumpers, especially cashmere, but now I'm being extra careful in not leaving anything where they can eat it. But after a couple of days it dried and was looking much better. not as bunched up, much more flowy, and the stripes look better, especially around the arms. So here are my final thoughts after having worn it a few times. Maybe I should have made a size bigger. I think the fit is a bit different than on the pictures of the sample, probably because of my gauge, but I was seeing this as a more oversized sweater. It's still pretty oversized, but maybe because the length is a bit cropped compared to what I would have liked, and perhaps with more positive ease it would have been perfect. The other change I would have made is to make the mock neck a bit smaller. I also think a deep raglan like that may not be the style that suits me the best, but I still do love it. I'm so proud of this make. I love the color combination I chose, and I'm happy that I managed to finish it just before summer is truly here. And I know I will wear it loads in the colder month. Thanks for knitting alongside me. I hope you enjoyed this type of vlog. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more, or if you prefer more chatty videos. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!